Good morning, Trumptopia! It's Saturday, July 1st of 2017. Day 161 of the Trumptopian era. I'm your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. And that was Lion's Heaven by Art of Escapism, available on freemusicarchive.org. Good morning, everyone. Hello. And fuck you too, right? Are we tired of the madness yet, or are we just getting warmed up? I abstained from recording any of my segments yesterday out of a sense of respect for the victims and anyone traumatized by the big shooting that was just all over the news yesterday during the day. I kind of felt overwhelmed by it, not in a victim way, but rather in a everything I have to say is sharp enough or harsh enough that saying it on the day of a big event like that is probably less than palatable for most people. I don't want to dwell on it. I was talking about the gun problem and the gun issue, and I've been promising a gun episode for ages now. I just want to say that I hate to sound this cynical or this jaded, but I called it, and I've called it year after year for a long time now. Even before I started posting my out-of-the-box thinking on social media on a face-to-face basis with real-life people, I have been indicating that it is my assessment that gun culture in America is designed, if you step back and take a top-down view, kind of a big-picture view, gun culture in America is designed to set us up for a never-ending onslaught of homegrown, lone wolf, going postal gun events like this, because, like the meme I read off yesterday, or a few episodes ago, or a few days ago, by Jon Stewart, it's a trap, man, as General Akbar would say. It's a trap. If everyone's operating on fear and anger, which are the two primary frequencies or emotive states of being that are pumped by our entertainment media at large. And no, I don't think that it is a huge and overt, although I guess it could be. Yes, I think that media is infused with brainwashing. Do I think that everyone in the industry thinks of themselves as a brainwasher? No. And we can't have absolutist black and white takes on that sort of issue. Just like back in the day during the beginnings of the rise of the Third Reich in Nazi Germany, there was a time when Nazi Germany was considered chill. It was considered an ally to the U.S. and others. And, if you go back and look at history, right before the war broke out, U.S. companies and German companies were doing lots of business together, and lots of interesting stuff was going on. And there was a sort of brief period where it was like, chill, the Nazis are just another cool political party somewhere in another part of the world that we don't really think much about. But we buy their products, So, zooming back to today, and acknowledging that my thought train just went right off the rails there. I want to thank you humbly all for listening and encourage you, especially those 3 of you that have been listening for a long time now. There's somebody that keeps my listening numbers moving, because both on Sprecher and on YouTube, very gently, day by day, week by week, the number of views, quote unquote, goes up. So thank you and namaste. This show may or may not be for you. I'm not really sure who you are and why you're listening, but thank you. And if it is for you, or if you're finding yourself challenged in a positive way by what I talk about, and interested in questioning and exploring alternative ideas beyond that which is, the primary fodder for our mainstream media, setting aside all opinions and conspiracy theories about the mainstream media, it is there, it is available for consumption. And it is a valid and seemingly profitable job market. One I would like to break into. But for that to happen, I need an internet fan base. So if you've been listening for more than 3 episodes, please, I beg you, in the most humble, I don't want to be famous for my own sake, but rather I think that there's a movement that is missing in our current cultural, political climate. And one way to help foster that movement is to facilitate each other in reaching a broader audience. So the purpose of me establishing this podcast is something that I'm willing to do as often as humanly possible, is for it to sort of hopefully grow towards a more traditional sort of call-in, interview, talk show type setup, so that we, whatever that collective collaboration group winds up becoming, can contribute to the public discourse, the stream of information going on and being discussed in the public discourse, and help facilitate at a national, a local, national, and global level the wider exploration by more and more people of mystic or transcendental or spiritual or Buddhist, or we need a better name, because all these names have already been sort of targeted by the oppressor and ridiculed enough to be easily dismissible by those deep in the conditioning. But some of us out there strongly believe, myself included, that if we just bring these ideas to more people, and more people can then decide for themselves about these ideas, because that's what the free speech, jam is about, right? Like, it's the point of free speech. It's not to argue with each other for the sake of arguing, and it's not to fight each other in order to build resentment and further divide segments of our population, but rather to intelligently, holistically, compassionately discuss and exchange our intermingle and share the ideas that we have passion about, so that as a nation or as a state or as a community, or we can process the different points of view that all of our different segments are expressing, and then build some consensus about how to, hate to use the word because it is a kind of ideology in and of itself, and a kind of ism, but in a secular fashion. In other words, not favoring one or another ideological construct over the rest. Build a new social compact, or a new social understanding, or a new societal agreement. In these interesting days... Oh, wait a minute. It just occurred to me something. I'm kind of scatterbrained today. It is a Saturday, and I often don't bother with, podcasty things on the weekend. But the last 3 days, setting aside all the horrible, sad, depressing things that happened, because the shooting in Brooklyn at that hospital was just one of many. The escalating madness spewing from the President of the United States of America's private Twitter account has just peaked at a new level of wow. And I wanted to take a moment, and I'm going to take it now, having remembered. I meant to open the show with it. Forgive me, everyone. I'm going to take a moment now as a human being, as a man, as a gentleman, both with a lowercase g and a capital case G. Well, I guess I'm only one of the two, right? Because one is, like, being generally polite, and the other is being of aristocratic nature. But you get my point. I want to take an opportunity to apologize to the entirety of the female population of planet Earth, not just of America, but of the entire planet, and to apologize to Mother Nature herself and all of her cosmic iterations, because there is a primary polemic in the cosmos, and this does not in any way, shape, or form endorse a superiority between amongst the gender identification classes. This has got nothing to do with that, because that's ideological in nature. And I'll touch on that in a little bit more in a minute, because it's a big part of today's contemporary sociopolitical environment, and should not be, neglected or swept under the rug or whatever, or sort of left behind in the otherwise, wild cornucopia of presidential reporting or commentary of epic proportions. Just the things that happen on a day-to-day basis are mind-blowing. But back to my point, there are two basic primary energetic polemics in the universe, which is, if you know anything about sacred geometry, it's the natural flowing forward from singularity, which is, yin and yang, masculine, feminine. This is not about body parts. This is about the collaborative, cooperative, interconnected nature of one of the primary lowercase d divisions in the universe. It's the first illusion, the first reality. It's the primary reality in this world of illusions. And I know that sounds like conflicting language, but tune into my almost daily Zencast to get a little bit deeper context into what I'm talking about when it comes to cosmology and how we need to update our comprehension of it. So to everything feminine, from the divine goddess of the highest order, Mother Nature, the goddesses muse, our sisters, both human and otherwise here on planet Earth, I and all the other gentlemen and true lovers and worshippers of the feminine divine, we apologize to you at all for the inexplicable, crazy, chauvinistic, deplorably pejorative, and inherently sexist, hate-filled attitude and sort of cultural dynamic that our current president of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, embodies and represents and perpetuates. In short, I apologize on behalf of the entire male spectrum of all things that exist in masculine form to all things feminine for this one example, this one bad apple in the apple cart of all things male. I appreciate that women and men in the world are sharing around the hashtag not all men, but there's plenty of other, like, not all cops, not all black men, not all minorities. Not all people are the horrible things that we categorically paint pejorative, archetypical, dismissive stereotypes about. Okay. That was a very long-winded apology. And I think that if you got a penis between your legs, or if you identify as whether you were born with a penis or not, to identify with the masculine side of that particular dynamic. Whether you want to pair with a female or not, you should take a moment to apologize to all the women in the world on behalf of this crass individual and the entire segment of the male population that he represents. Let it not be forgotten that in the human species, these kinds of examples, good or bad, do not exist in isolation. There's a lot of men in politics right now trying to create a little bit of distance between themselves and our dearly beloved orange toupeed leader. Although I guess it's not a toupee. It's some sort of hair loss covering coif, because it is all his own hair. I've seen the footage. But darn it if it doesn't look like a toupee some of the time. I wonder if he's got like a body double and that guy has to wear a toupee or something. Anyways. Because it's more important than this one individual avatar's gross misogyny and blatant disrespect to all things feminine. He, as an individual, represents a spiritual malady that runs deep, not just in American culture, but in masculinity around the world. Let's be frank about that. Let's not throw that little baby out with the bathwater of getting lost in the argument about whether or not it's important that this individual has these kinds of opinions in the political scheme of what's going on the global stage. Words matter, attitudes matter, cultural norms as perpetuated through subtle language cues matter. That's a really long and complicated hashtag, right? Also, and I don't want to alienate all the women and probably all the feminists that just got on board with me for a hot second because of what I just did or said, we also had to take a moment to stand back and not get caught up in the label argument, the label fight between, feminism and non-feminism, etc., etc., etc. Because that is, whether explicitly or not, whether implicitly or not, I guess I just sort of defied my own nuanced statement there, but no matter how you slice it, the actions of the leader of Trumptopia are kind of inherently designed to cause division. And I know that some people feel like they understand that, but then they jump right back on the bandwagon of let's go fight with everybody else about it. Alright, so many subjects to touch on related to all this. But I guess I walked right into this one. One of the things that's going on that makes it really hard, I think, in my opinion, for Trumptopians to transcend their Trumptopian illness, their temporary madness that is what I call Trumptopia. The collective delusion that this is going to be the new norm. And it's happening all over the place. It is not an issue reserved only for those who cling hardest to the lies and the falsehoods that they really desperately want to be true. But it's also the malady of any and all who are falling prey to the pit trap, the ego trap of fighting. There's a fine line between resisting and falling for the ego trap of fighting. I know that I've talked about it at length in other segments, so I refer, for those of you who are like, what does he mean, ego trap? Like, I humbly invite you to dig deeper into my many series here, my many little different segments, and sort of, do a little binge listening to try to get some deeper context. But essentially, I propose to you that everything in this world, as we know it, and I apologize to all those who are like, yeah, I've heard you explain this before. Everything in this world is either a pit trap into, on the downward spiral of ego, or it's on the it's some sort of healing step towards ascension into enlightenment, which is a whole other process, by the way. There is a spiritual malady that the entire human species is suffering, and has been suffering for a long time. Do not misunderstand me. I'm not trying to say that this is the fault of Donald Trump. It's not. He's a victim and a product of this spiritual malady. He's a product and a victim of this spiritual malady. And a warning sign, a sort of, hey everybody, spiritual malady is at play. That's his job, spiritually speaking. He is trapped being who he is, doing what he does, and in a sort of crazy way, sort of doing a really good job at it. Because his role in America today, I've said it before and I'll say it again, is to be the ugly mirror of what is wrong with all of our society. He exists because American society has secretly festered away, or quietly, not secretly so much, because it's kind of, when everybody sort of knows it, except for those who don't, it's not really a secret, is it? It's more of an open secret, or, I don't know, there's another term for it, but has these, all the horrible, ugly, disgusting things that he presents to us on a daily basis, all the things about his personality, his demeanor, his attitude, his energy, his actions, and his behaviors that are overt and over the top, and covert that we haven't even heard about yet, because they're the things that we are being distracted from. They are here to shake us up and to wake us up, and to force us to ask ourselves a lot of questions. How low can the President of the United States of America go in his chauvinism, in his wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I'm not a racist, but sort of xenophobia, frothing kind of other hate speech. Like, he's not a racist, but he sure as heck promotes borderline hate speech towards a lot of groups of otherness, Well, tragically, my friends, the answer to that question is as low as we, the people of the United States, will let him. And I know there's a lot of people who already oppose him, who already disagree with him, who already are in effect trying to resist him. But it's not. It's bigger or smaller or deeper than that. It's more complicated than that. Because for as long as we treat Donald Trump and his supporters as illegitimate others, as foreign to us, as the enemy, then we're doing it all wrong. Right? Because that's not what it's about. He's getting away with what he's getting away with. And politicians of whatever variety have always gotten away with what they get away with, because we are easily distracted down these lines of distraction. So we have to always be on the ready, right? More important, more effective than any massive collection of guns in someone's closet against the machinations of tyranny is the question, what are these distractions, these layered, these sophisticated, these very nuanced, almost plausible, but then also kind of easily debunkable distractions What are they distracting us from? Asking that question of oneself and of each other, both at home, in private, and out there in the world, in the civic forum of public discourse. In other words, with civility, with respect, with compassion towards each other's position, and especially for those of you who are, if you're tuning into this show, then you might already be aware of the fact that most people have been conditioned. In fact, all people have suffered lifelong exposure to conditioning. None of us are free of it. Some of us have maybe woken up, or I hate to use that phrase because none of us are awake yet, especially if you're using capital A, awake. That's a very technical spiritual phenomena that not to disparage anyone's use of the term or anyone's relationship with that term, but the deepest and the fullest and the most real definition of that term is happening and is not a state of completion for anyone yet. More on that in other segments, especially Almost Daily Zencast. But politically and pragmatically, we are in an era where we have to, as a society, build consensus about how we are going to cope with corruption. And one of the most effective things that we can do is build consensus around issues that we are generally discouraged from discussing. No one's really asking. Some people are sort of addressing that or pretending to answer that question and suggesting that Donald Trump's crazy tweets against the Morning Joe hosts are a distraction from what's going on with healthcare, or are a distraction from what's going on with the Russia investigation, or are a distraction from other political actions that the Trump administration are taking or are announcing, or are a distraction from certain disclosures being made public about Mike Flynn or Manafort. And that's probably all a valid thing, because Trump is the master of distraction. If you look back with a really clear mind, a really clear vision, set aside any bias in favor of him, and look at the facts of his career, the man carries a big stick and then waves it around and then pokes you in the butt with a much smaller stick from a direction that you weren't expecting. It's a horrible analogy. But we have to really, really ask ourselves and each other and look for the answers to that question. What are they distracting us from? And one of the issues there that comes to mind then is this Russia thing really fake or really real? And who do we have to blame for this? And how do we measure corruption? Right? What is corruption? If you've noticed over the last 4 or 5 years on this corruption question, there's been political movement in the form of cases being decided by different courts across the land about what corruption is and how to define it. And in some of these cases, the names of which are totally blanking from my mind right now, I think it was a mayor or a governor was, had received gifts and other items and apparently in exchange for providing certain endorsements and connections, introductions, and sort of shepherding laws into place that benefited certain wealthy individuals who owned the corporations in question, regarding the laws passed. And one of these cases, they passed on any punishment or any kind of charges because they narrowly defined what corruption meant, to exclude the activities they were being investigated and that had triggered law enforcement to try and bring charges against the person. That has been going on in America probably since day one, and continues to happen, and is nothing new in world history. And I think that that kind of thing is going to happen the deeper we get into this Russia investigation. Addressing the question of whether or not it is real news or fake news, the Fox outlets and anybody, official or unofficial, who's claiming that the very idea of Russian intervention in American politics is a hoax or a lie or quote-unquote fake news, that is bullshit. Here's why I believe that is so. Instead, I've scanned both. I've scanned the news services from all around the political spectrum, and I've tried to dig past, just the headlines enough without burning out on this topic, without devoting 24 hours a day of my entire life on it, because I can't afford that kind of time. But as much as any individual can reasonably do on some reasonably measured free time, and I think most notably by watching as much of the raw, unedited, uncommented on footage from the committee hearings asking people about Russian intervention here in the United States and abroad in other countries. Okay? I've come to the determination that the investigations are real. They're actually happening. They're not happening, okay? I think there are Fox News blind believers that think that there isn't even an investigation being conducted or something, because of the blatant way in which over and over again, every hour, every show, they somehow, on the different Fox News, except for the local news, they don't tend to address this on the local news, they're a little bit more even-handed sounding, they basically declare Russia a hoax, and without much other explanation, and then rush to the aid in the defense of the president. To the best of my understanding, unless this testimony coming from ambassadors from around the world, and I took a couple of names down while they were on, because there was a repeat of one of the long segments of testimony. Where did I write this down? I wrote this down somewhere. It's not here. Where did I... Forgive me. Oh, here we are. From this past Wednesday. Hours upon hours of legitimate testimony from legitimate sounding people from the actual hearing. Okay? I think that if people who are writing off Russia intervention in politics as a lie, as a myth, as a thing that didn't really happen or isn't really happening, they need to watch some of this C-SPAN footage. I'm sure it's all over cspan.org. This is real footage, unedited, unaltered, without commentary, without people paid for by any other news, by anybody anywhere, other than the American people paying the taxpayers' money at work in these hearings. And these are actual senators asking actual ambassadors from actual other countries. And 100%, hands down, in every case that I've seen, every minute of testimony that I've seen, the foreign ambassadors, the two examples I wrote down because they were the two people that were they were bouncing back and forth on this morning, just because I wanted to revisit it real quick, because I wanted to talk about this today. And I wish I'd had time to see more people or to look up more people's names, because I know others have testified besides these two people. They're just the two examples. Nicholas Burns, who works at some university or another, but that bit kind of flashed off and I didn't get a chance to write down. But he's a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Setting aside whatever your opinions of what the United Nations is, of whatever conspiracy theory about the United Nations do or do not believe is real, this guy's a legitimate player, or he's a total deep state part of the conspiracy theory, right? Okay. Let's being real and trying to round down to the most normal reality we can pretend we all have consensus around. This guy has been in a position to see and form his opinion and his assessment based on facts, or at least things that come closest to verifiable facts from other countries and not the news, okay? Because this guy has traveled the world, has been to the countries in question, and we haven't. And neither have anybody on any of the news channels, except for the journalists who have. Duh. Then another guy, Vesko Garcevic, which I'm sure I totally butchered his name. He's currently a university professor at Boston University, some kind of international law study, I think. And he's the former ambassador to NATO for the country of Montenegro. And he's lived in other countries that were impacted by Soviet activities. These two guys are the only two that I was able to catch this morning. But throughout the last 3 or 4 weeks, I think, it's almost going on over a month now, right? That the investigations finally sort of really began taking place. There's 3 kinds of people following this news, as we can agree to it as whatever the facts are that are real news. And they're watching from, the 3 kinds of people are either reading or watching from their favorite polarized news source, or from some news source that attempts to be as neutral as possible, because there are some out there. And I think C-SPAN has got to rank in the top 3, because it literally offers zero commentary on its programming other than that provided by its guests and its call-in audience, right? They don't have opinion hosts. So hats off to them. They do a much harder job than people like me or other, from any position do. I have a position. I have an opinion. I'm speaking from a quote-unquote agenda. Mine just sort of exists in a place beyond the current normalized political spectrum, I would argue. Anyway, C-SPAN truly, legitimately provides you raw video footage to the news-making events that are usually so boring that no one wants to watch them. That's why most people would rather watch Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity parse out their opinion or corporate bias interpretation of those extremely boring news events than to watch those actually extremely boring news events. Well, my friends, if you want the closest thing to fact that you can get, given our current situation and our current method of delivery of these things, I mean, the only better thing you can do is go to where the shit is happening. If you're talking about these trials, and it's to try to attend, I don't think you can. I don't think the general public can just waltz on up to Capitol Hill and be like, knock, knock, hello, I'd like to sit in on this congressional hearing on Russian, but I don't think you can do that. Maybe you can, I don't know. That's a thing, right? Of course, one of the ironies is the moment you make an event like that too big, it becomes a circus in and of itself. But as things stand right now, I think you can credit a few agencies like C-SPAN, a few media platforms like C-SPAN, for going above and beyond the average sort of corporate quote-unquote Call of Duty. Probably because they're non-profit organizations and they don't have a corporate profit-motivated board of directors to answer to. And they have a clear, direct, truth and fact-based mission to fulfill. Maybe we need a few more news agencies like that. And I'm not disparaging opinion in saying that. I believe, like I keep saying, in public discourse. It has to be confined to certain boundaries. For example, one of the big issues, and this will have to be the end of this part of the segment, one of the big issues I keep seeing floating around, both as we listen to the talking heads debate how to respond, what the appropriate response to the United States, the President of the United States spewing hate speech, because that's what it is. You got to admit it. When he says things that vile, that anger-ridden, that obvious in its intent to hurt, You can't call it anything else. Right? And people are standing up and insisting on calling hate speech something that is protected by the protection of free speech. I hate to be that asshole, but fuck you. And while I'll stand up for everybody's right to use curse words, we also have to acknowledge that that's the beginning of hate speech. All right? And we have to tread lightly once we border on hate speech, because our right to free speech ends at the boundary where it begins to transgress into hate speech. Never, in my opinion, to the best of my understanding, has the legal protection of free speech ever in the postmodern history of American politics, has it ever defended or overtly included hate speech in its calculus. It's not. It just hasn't. Hate speech is indefensible because it's a slippery slope towards violence, the propagation of violence, and the issuance and the actual committing of violence. Duh. And this being, if not an actual Christian nation, a society deeply influenced by Judeo-Christian ideals, quote unquote, then peace is something we're supposed to be striving for. I gotta wrap it up for this portion of the segment. What I want to say is, I was asking this question: is this Russia thing really real? I think that and I'll continue with this in part 2 of today's episode. I think that Russia is a real place, and that Russians are real people, in as much as anything is real in this illusion, the cosmic illusion, and that those people, Vladimir Putin all the way on down to the sheeple being manipulated in that societal system, that those group of people and that system indeed have a role to play. Just like our beloved leader, and this is a hard thing for people to wrap their brains around, because it challenges us to radically redefine our attitude towards those doing horrible things. But those doing horrible things, they are there to challenge us and to challenge us to learn how to forgive them and how to heal them. More on that in part 2 of Good Morning Trumptopia, and of course in your almost daily Zencast and other segments. Thank you for tuning in. May peace, love, and grooviness be with you today. As always, share the love. Help me reach a broader audience. And help me refine my own thinking by presenting your questions, your challenges, your disagreements, your agreements. This has been the incorrigible Mr. Zepho. As always, your humble host, not pretending to be anything other than I am. I'm not a guru. I'm not even a politician, although I wouldn't mind running for office, any office that I'm eligible for. Remember, folks, we are in this clusterfuck we call Trumptopia together. Regardless of whether you are a Republican, Democrat, a progressive, an independent, a liberal, a conservative, a non-voter. We are in this together, folks. And it's time we transcend the ideology, which is nothing more than thought control systems. We gotta transcend these ideologies that divide us.